Hello and welcome to Being Well. I'm Forrest Hanson. If you're new to the show, thanks for joining us today. And if you've listened before, welcome back. If I had to put the focus of this show into one word, it's probably change. And to expand a bit from there, particularly changing our level of emotional or psychological functioning, which then helps us change so much about our lives. That order is important. Internal change tends to fuel external change. And while accumulating more knowledge matters, what often tips the scales for people is the emotional side of the equation. We try to outthink our stress, perfectionism, our resentment, but what actually moves things is our relationship to those feelings, whether we can welcome them, understand what they're pointing to, and then act based on that understanding. And I'm joined by somebody today whose work appealed to me in part because I thought it was so consistent with everything that I just said. My guest today is Joe Hudson, an executive coach and teacher who's worked with some of the world's top leaders at a variety of Fortune 50 companies. So Joe, thanks for joining me today. How are you doing?
Pleasure to be here. Yeah, great. It was great. It was really nice to hear that introduction.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Do you think that's kind of a fair characterization of the work you do with people?
Yeah, the way I would put it is a little bit different, but it generally jives. What I would say is that I think that there's three things that need to be addressed if you're going to have transformation, and one is the brain, one is the emotional, and one is the nervous system. And they're kind of different, they're kind of not, but it's very useful to make them different. And in our society, what I would say is the most neglected one is typically emotion. So you'll usually get the most bang out of your buck in the emotional and how you relate to your emotions. And if you welcome your emotions, that is where you're going to probably get the most lift off the quickest for most people. But there are some occasions where the emotion system is doing well and you got to address the brain or the nervous system.
Totally. Yeah. No, and I think that's really fair as well. I'm wondering, when people come to work with you, maybe based on already what we're starting to talk about here a little bit today, what do they tend to say that the problem is for them? And then after working with them, what do you observe the problem is for them?
So, wow, that's a great. So I typically, it depends on if I'm doing one of our rapid coaching sessions, and it's a little bit different. But say I'm working with a client, what I'll typically say is like, what's the biggest thing happening in your business? What's the biggest thing happening in your relationships? What's the biggest thing happening inside of you that's creating some sort of tension? And then we typically find out, maybe 80% of the time, we find out that it's the same thing, that it's the same pattern underlying all three of those things. And so what they'll say is often very different, both in the three things and one person to another person. So I'll hear from executives often maybe something like, I feel alone in this, or stress or burnout, or I got everything I wanted, but now I don't want my life. Some version of that is potentially another like series of things that I might get from an executive would be, my team isn't aligned. They all nod yes, but it doesn't actually happen. Um, some version of some part of my business is stuck, some part of my life is stuck, and I want to get unstuck. So that would be a lot of the stuff that the executives come with on the mental side and the business side. And then typically emotionally, there's a tendency for most people who are really high achievers to feel alone, like nobody has their back, that they have to do it all themselves. And so that's often something that comes up. On the inside thing, the most typical thing is that it's either some emotions that they don't want to feel or a really abusive internal self-talk.
What's typically the roots of that for people, do you find?
Yeah, the roots for the negative self-talk is typically the way they were raised or cared for as a child, typically. So, it often resembles something that their parents or teachers or sister or brother or something said a lot. That's often something that happens. It's a really fascinating thing. The negative self-talk is like, if you think to yourself and you like have your brain like under scan, you'll see that the prefrontal cortex lights up, but the rest of your body doesn't. But if you actually say it out loud, then the rest of your brain or other parts of your brain light up, not the rest of it. And so when we're thinking to ourselves, oftentimes it's not embodied at all. And so it's just this recorder that's going. And even just to speak your voice in the head out loud to another person often will let you realize how abusive it is, how you would never say it to somebody else.
For a lot of people who have that pattern,
Yeah.
and I've smelled versions of that pattern in my personal life as well.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people struggle with different kinds of self criticism or negative self talk. There's this kind of story that we tell ourselves that the self criticism is what got us to where we are,
Yeah.
particularly in the context of your work. You're working with a lot of very high performing people. And
Yeah.
so there's this kind of fear that if you you relax around the self criticism or you release the pattern, then you're gonna, fill in the blank. You're gonna lose your edge. You're not gonna perform at the same level. All of that. Is there something that you say to that part, if we kind of think about it in that sort of language when you're working with someone?
I have dozens of things to say to that
Yeah,
part
I'm
because that
sure.
part is so yeah. The easiest one for people to really feel is you just say, okay, imagine you're doing your work and your boss is next to you, and 50,000 times a day, because I think that's what the Mayo Clinic says. We have 50,000 thoughts a day, right? So 50,000 times a day, they're like, oh, you could have done that better. What are you doing? Wait, you shouldn't do it that way. What do you think your boss is going to think? Don't forget to do this thing. Like, imagine your boss just doing that. Like, how would you perform?
Sure. Yeah.
And that immediately allows them to know, oh, right, I would not perform as well. So that's one way to do it. Also, apparently they did a study on the like top 25 uh, tennis players in the world, male tennis players, I believe it was. And they're like, what's the difference between the top 5 and the top 20? And it wasn't their training. And it was literally how they talk to themselves. It was I wouldn't call it positive, because I think positive self-talk is often also toxic. Meaning, like, if I say everything's great and I'm going to have a great day today, I'm responding to the actual thought, which is today's going to suck. I wouldn't say that to somebody. I wouldn't like say that to somebody who's I clearly think is going to have a great day. So there's that level of it that you have to watch out for. But they seem to be more like, oh, I enjoy myself. Oh, I messed that shot up. That's okay. They're not dwelling. They're not going over and over again and spinning on their thoughts. And so you see those statistics, it becomes easier to really think. But what they're really breaking through there isn't, they're not breaking through the habit of talking to themselves negatively. They're breaking through an identity. Like that,
Yeah.
they're identified in that. And so what's really scary to let go of is your identity, because it's, what you think you are. And so a lot of the work is to let people see who they truly are instead of who they think they are. I would say almost all of my work is that in some way.
One of the things that comes through IFS or internal family systems therapy, as
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
familiar with, I'm sure, or kind of like a parts work framework in general. And to me, what you're talking about here feels very kind of spiritually consistent with that. There's an aspect of personality that's got a kind of story attached to it.
Yeah.
One of the beliefs inside of that system is that each of these parts is trying to fulfill a kind of purpose or fit into a role inside of a
Yeah.
healthy functioning system, but things went sideways somewhere along the way. And
Yeah.
so that part got put into a role that wasn't so great inside of it. Is is part of what you're doing in terms of the transformational work with people, in terms of like trying to, like you were saying, trying to change self identity?
First of all, I would not term it as trying to change an identity, because um, that amount of force usually gets force in reaction to it. So for me, it's more of just like, let's find out who we are. Let's see who we actually are here. So it's more of the uncovering of self than it is trying to change or transform or become better. I think just the idea of becoming better assumes that there's something fucked up with you. And that's not a particularly great way to start. And the way I think about that is that, an acorn, a 5-year-old oak tree, 100-year-old oak tree, like, is there a problem with any of them? You know, they're just in stages of development, as are we. So what makes us think that because we're an acorn or because we're a sapling that there's a problem with us? So that's one thing about it. As far as the parts work itself, oftentimes I will work with somebody and like we'll identify a part, and then we'll see what it was trying to accomplish, or what good it does, or all the cool stuff about that part, because there's nothing about us that doesn't have a reason to be there, that isn't, you know well adjusted on some level, even though what we're doing is no longer adjusted. At some point, it learned it for a reason, and there was something it was achieving. But just generally, I think with the parts work, there's a place for it, and then there's a place to let go of it. I think it can get very confusing for people when now all of a sudden there's multiple of them, and they're
keeping track of everything. All of that.
Yeah. So for me, it's like we're constantly going back to what's your essential self. Like, what is it that has never changed your entire life? Like, that's the essence of you. What is it that has never been damaged by all the trauma? And to get in touch with that aspect of yourself, to be able to be with that aspect of yourself when you want to be with it, to be able to see through those eyes, so to speak. I think that's essential. And if you get dogmatic about the parts work, oftentimes that can stop that from happening.
Yeah, no, that's my experience too. And something just to pull out, one piece of what you were saying there is that kind of joining with the defense idea is sort of the technical language on it. But just experientially for people, I've just so rarely seen somebody change in a positive way through forms of self-flagellation. And sometimes the personal development work in a funny way can start to take on this very self-punishing quality for people.
Yes.
Where it's coming from that place of like, oh, here's the list of things that are wrong with me. And that's why I got to fire up the podcast to call in the various solutions or whatever. And I like how that's something that's so emphasized in what you're saying here.
Yeah, there's that version of it. It's a very crucial part. There's that version. The other version is like, once X, Y, and Z I have achieved, then I can A, B, and C. Then I can be happy.
Totally.
Then I can be loved. Then I can be rich. Then I can be. I mean, I went through that for a decade. I beat myself up to become better for a decade. And the one thing that I've noticed is that it's not efficient. There is potentially a necessity to it, only to see that it's self-defeating, only to see that, oh, now I'm beating myself up for beating myself up. Okay, now I'm beating just this, to see the neuroses of it, to see, you can bang your head against the wall enough times where you might say, oh, I should stop banging my head against the wall. So I think even if somebody's doing that work, if they're beating themselves up, there's a way to hold that gently too.
How do you keep the frame in that more curious or more like enjoyment oriented space when you're working with somebody?
Oh, the thing that leads an oak tree to grow or a fish to swim back to its spawning ground, or, that's in all of us. Like, we all have this natural wisdom to return to wholeness. It gets very confused, but when I'm working with people, that's what I follow. I'm following them. And so I'm curious, because I know that my next step is not ever going to be as good as their next step. I might be the map. I might say, oh, watch out for this mountain range, or, hey, these rivers are easier to navigate than, but there's a core belief that it's not, I'm not saying that you're good enough. I actually believe like the wholeness of every person I'm sitting across from. So if that's a true belief system, then it's really easy to be in wonder and follow them around. And that's, I think, like when you watch the rapid coaching on YouTube, it's what makes me really effective. Everybody's like looking to copy, this technique or that technique or everything. But what's actually happening is just I'm unconditionally loving them, and I know that they're there. I know
there's a lot of humanistic psychology in that. Some Rogers, unconditional positive regard, all of that is a lot of what you're kind of speaking to here. So you have a way that you're being with somebody, which is modeling a way that they can be with themselves, is kind of correct. One of the things that you're suggesting here.
Yeah. I don't do it to model, just to be clear.
Sure.
I don't do it to model it. I do it because it fucking feels great.
Totally. Totally.
I do it because that's how I love to be with people. And it is quite pleasant,
Yeah. And it's real and authentic. And that also, if you want to go there, is a kind of modeling, if you want to put it that way. I just think that one of the things that people talk about all the time when they watch the show or listen to it, because I do about half the episodes with Rick, who's my dad.
Yeah.
One of the most consistent pieces of feedback that we get about the show is it's great to hear you guys talk about all of these ideas, but what I'm really internalizing from this is what it looks like to see a positive parent-child relationship
Yeah.
in a world where it's like so uncommon to see a positive parent-child relationship, and like that's actually just kind of the modeling of the way that we are relationally with each other, including when we piss each other off or when he says something on the show I disagree with or whatever, we kind of get into it. Like we can do that without it exploding our whole relationship. And that's so foreign to people sometimes.
Similarly, so we have a podcast where somebody interviews me. That's most of our episodes. There's very little of us interviewing, but there's a couple episodes with my daughter, and I think they are the ones I get the most comments about, the ones that people are most touched by, is to actually see how we relate to one another. So it's, it's very, very similar.
So you were talking a second ago about, in the seed to a sapling to an oak tree metaphor, just some version of what you need is kind of there already.
Yeah.
And our job is to help you get back in touch with it.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that maybe you're doing that a little bit is in that kind of unconditional positive regard, being with in a really warm and curious way. Are there other things you do to help people kind of explore that?
Yeah, I dismantle every thought that they have.
What does that look like?
The nature of the mind is to compare, is to dissect, is to make a object and subject. And so if you think about like Gödel's mathematical incompleteness theorem, any form of logic will either be based on assumption or contradict itself at some point. And logically, you can prove that. So oftentimes our thoughts and our limiting beliefs our belief systems are very limiting to us. And so I will deconstruct thought processes with them. And you'll see me do this a lot. And the coaching is just like rattle the brain enough so that the brain might see that there's something else besides the brain, rattle the brain enough so that someone can like listen to their heart or listen to their gut, listen to their body. Rattle the brain enough so that it doesn't think that it knows what's up, right? So if you've been sitting there and stuck on a thing for a decade or two, or you've been mulling over something and you've had thoughts, a great idea of this would be, I can't find the right woman for me. I can't find the right woman for me. I can't find, and this is the perfect woman. And you have this whole logical construction and the pie chart of what the great woman is or what, you've seen this, I'm sure. And, so where the brain hasn't been solving that problem for a decade. So, but it really thinks it's got the right way to do it.
That's, for sure.
Yeah. So I'll just make it so that it's very apparent that the brain's not trustworthy in this regard as the leader. It's a really important tool. Like I love our brains and I love working with really smart people, but it just in many aspects of our life should not be leading. And so to deconstruct it, to show that though it's convicted and it's convinced of itself, it's not being logical. And as it turns out, studies show that the smarter you are, the more convinced you can be by your own lack of logic. And so oftentimes you'll see this in a relationship. You'll see, and I'm sure some people are going to like have these light bulbs pop up when this one happens, but there's usually the smart one and the emotional one. Like in a lot of relationships, you'll see the smart one and the emotional
logical,
one.
rational, emotional.
Right.
Yeah. Totally.
And the smart one, rational one, everybody will agree that they're smarter, but what they're actually agreeing to is that the emotional one is more empathetic and he is empathizing with their conviction. And so you'll see this happen a lot in a relationship, and the relationship balances and becomes really beautiful when the logic person sees the wisdom of the emotion and the emotional person sees the wisdom of the logic. Not right or wrong, not a right or wrong logic, but like, oh, there's brilliance in both of them and well integrated. It's a lot better than one or the other.
Speaking as a chronically logical, rational person for probably about the first 30 some odd years of my life, I would empathize for starters with that experience. And and also like, that's the side of the coin that I can see it from because that's the life I've lived, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine this is probably true for the other side of the coin too, but certainly for me, we just did an episode on emotional regulation, and I think that your work on emotional clarity is really consistent with a lot of what we ended up talking about. This can be really emotionally rich for somebody to kind of explore even the idea that the thoughts that they're having or the models that they're carrying around, like you said, like a model of what a good partner looks like or what a good woman looks like,
Yeah.
it are on some level kind of like deceitful, or they're serving a function that is not the function that you kind of think that they're serving on the surface level. And for certainly my own experience, like you get to the bottom of that a little bit, and there can be a moment of like, whoa, this is emotionally intense for whatever reason.
Typically, a lot of people will use their brain to disassociate from emotions. The couple places where that happens consistently is judgment. Every time I see a person judge somebody else, you can just ask, if you couldn't judge, what's the emotion you'd have to feel? And there's a strong emotion underneath it.
I think that's a great example. I'm just kind of thinking through that.
Yeah. So thank you. There's oftentimes the thinking is being done to prevent the feeling. And so when you deconstruct the brain, then you can get to the emotional stuckness that's underneath. Because it's, if you look into our brain, if I reached in your brain and I pulled out the emotional center of your brain, you would cease to make decisions. It would literally take you half an hour to decide what color pen to use, even though your IQ would stay the same. Our decision making, neurologically speaking, happens in the emotional center of our brain, outside of like jumping back from a snake. That happens in a different part of the brain, and you can see it like, oh, how many decisions did I make to feel loved, or to not feel like a loser, or to get the approval of my dad, or like any kind of emotional experience that we're looking for. How many times are we getting on YouTube because we don't want to feel something, or because we want to feel something?
And then we come up with a great logical, rational explanation for why we did the
Exactly.
thing, but the root of it was the emotion. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And so when somebody's stuck in anything in their life, typically there's an unfelt emotion underneath. And so in the work that we do live with people and some of the online courses, you'll see it so consistently. They'll have a big emotional release and boom, clarity, just like right on the other side of it. And I can't tell you, like, it's so predictable.
When you say they have a big emotional release, what does
Yeah.
that look like for people in practice? And understanding that I'm sure it has enormous variety.
This is something that this is something that, this is a place where a lot of trauma can come out. This is a place that's very touch and go. People, we don't do this easily and without a lot of care and
Totally.
and support. But generally, people are angry. It's yelling and moving their body in angry ways, kicking, screaming, beating. If it's fear, it's making fear sounds and shaking typically. And if it's sadness, it's crying and heaving typically. And sometimes I think the word is undulation, ula. There's a word for it.
Yeah, ululation or whatever, however you say it. I know what you're talking about.
And then grief can be all three. What I would call grief is like all three of those things. And what I notice is that they're really tied into transformation, meaning like a typical pattern would be, oh, I see that I've been beating myself up for 20 years and it's been unnecessary and it doesn't help me. And it's actually bad fuel and it's actually stopping me from being who I want to be. And it's preventing me from being as productive as I want to be. Okay, that I have the mental recognition, but I also recognize that I should work out and I'm not working out. So like, what's the mental recognition? But it's important. It's important. Oftentimes when that person grieves the fact that that has been happening for 20 years, that they've wasted that part of their life, that they've been unkind to themselves for no reason, then the transformation starts to happen.
This feels like it really relates to another idea of yours that I bumped into that really connected with. You just put some great language to it. I think you called it the golden algorithm.
Oh, yeah.
How does this relate, and what is that?
Yeah. So I don't usually geek out on it as much as I'm about to, but this
you've come to the right place. You've come to the right place. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in the simple part of the golden algorithm is the emotion that we are trying to prevent, we invite in the exact way we try to prevent it. Perfect example of this is, I'm in my 20s. My parents were emotionally abandoned me. I don't want to feel emotional abandonment. I start to get a sniff of emotional abandonment and I do one of two things. I get really hard. Yeah, fine. I don't care. which makes people emotionally abandon me. Or I get needy. Oh, come here, come here, which makes people emotionally abandon me. So the way that I'm trying to avoid the emotion is the exact way in which I invite it. And so to geek out, and then I'll go back to the golden algorithm. To geek out, the way I see that this works is we're kids or we're an adult and we have an emotional experience that we can't have at that moment, right? So I can't feel unsafe that my parents won't take care of me. That would be
Sure. Yeah.
horrific. Or I can't feel like my parents don't love me. So I have to feel like there's something wrong with myself. But I don't get to have that emotional experience. And so my body, my brain, my system recreates a similar experience over and over again until I can have that emotional experience that I haven't been able to have to get back to homeostasis. It's like I keep on trying to get rid of the toxin. I keep on trying to get rid of the toxin. And the way that I get rid of it is to actually have that emotional experience. Once I have the emotional experience, I don't have to repeat the pattern. So for me, with the golden algorithm, when I recognized what was happening with abandonment, and it was before I had the concept of golden algorithm, I was like, oh, the only way that this is going to work is if I can look forward to being emotionally abandoned. If I can say, I can't wait for the next time that I'm abandoned, that I feel that experience. And the way I got there was because every time I'm feeling abandoned, I am leaving myself. And so that gives me an opportunity to stay with myself. It gives me an opportunity to learn to be with myself even when it's difficult, which will give me more freedom. I'm less controlled by other people. I can love myself better. So it became an opportunity to increase my freedom. And so as soon as I could look forward to it and go, oh, great, I'm being abandoned. This is fantastic. What am I going to get to learn? What's the freedom on the other side? Then, and then the whole pattern changed. Now, what was interesting was then I got into this. I was like, oh, I'll just like lean into the thing that I'm avoiding.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I started leaning into it to get rid of it and it stopped working. So, meaning like if I'm leaning in, I can't wait to be abandoned so that I never have to feel abandonment again. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It actually requires loving acceptance internally, which is why it's so easy for me to do it externally because I think that highly correlated. Your capacity to love others is equal to your capacity to love all the parts of yourself.
There's so much there. I'm wondering if you've got a background, a secret background in psychoanalysis, because there are just aspects of this around repressed emotion and around the return of the repressed and what are the experiences that we're avoiding, all of that kind of thing. The framework that, we just did a couple of episodes on this. I think that Freud got a lot wrong, but one of the things that I think he nailed was repression. And I think it's true that we're just hanging on to a lot of stuff. And when we push that stuff down, it doesn't really go anywhere. And what you're describing is kind of a way to welcome an experience. And like, what is it like to actually like be open-handed with even a very painful, distressing experience, which is a really hard thing to do.
I just recently was thinking about like the greatest gift we can give our children as a parent, like, is for a kid to feel like they can, that we welcome and they can welcome all the parts of themselves. Like that's the,
Mm.
I can welcome your tears. I can welcome your anger. I can welcome your thoughts. I can welcome your screw ups. I can welcome your trials and tribulations. Like the more that, and in general, what that is preventing repression.
Yeah, totally. Did you find it was easier for you to start doing this with other people before you could do it with yourself, or did you find that they were really hand in hand?
I know there was no part of me wanting to be a coach. Yeah, that was like doing it with other people was not. I was interested in this kind of stuff my whole life, but I had a meditation retreat where I had this experience that I wanted to replicate. So I chased it. I just chased every tool that I could get to replicate that experience, only to find out that that's absolute torture. It doesn't work, and I don't have to replicate it. It's always happening. What I did was that I was an investor. I was a venture capitalist, and I had been on my journey for 25 years before. And it's something that I notice oftentimes when someone's like, oh, I want to start coaching or I want to be a therapist. There's often a lot of psychological reasons they're doing it. That is, and including me. I mean, I've had to wrestle with a number of these, but that they're doing it, that is that hurts them and the people that they're serving. And one of them is trying to help people, trying to it's usually typically I had a parent who told me that my job was to care for them instead of care for myself.
Sure. Yeah.
And so now my identity is caring for people. And so I'm kind of walking around as the savior. And so there's a lot of that that's happening. I did that in investment. So I learned that lesson before I got into coaching pretty well. Made a couple of slips on that. And then there's also this, like, I want to be the knower. And then, which is, a kind of narcissism that's very difficult to help people, to be of value to people, to support people with that level of needing that kind of approval. And then the last one that I see that gets in the way for a lot of folks is this false sense of intimacy. Oh, I get to have vulnerability with somebody, but I have no risk. So I get this feeling of closeness, but I don't actually have the closeness.
It feels
And
safe.
so that's another, it's like this safe form of closeness. And so it's really a way to keep yourself separate. So I see a lot of coaches that I've done a coaching training and now I'm off coaching, but really those are the things that seem to motivate them.
Yeah, I mean, research is me search for so much of this, right? Like we get drawn to the things that
That's great. Did you just say research is me search?
Research is me search. It's it's not an original, but it's a great line. It's a fantastic line. Yeah, and if you look at, I mean, literal research that's done in academia, people generally follow their own interests. They follow their own experiences. And so for people who end up doing this kind of work, relational work, trauma work, whatever it is, a lot of the time they're drawn to it because they had their own painful experiences, right? And so there's this kind of, I mean, people have written a lot about this, but it's kind of like it can be an attempt to heal a wound inside of yourself by healing wounds in other people. You see that in parenting sometimes too. People have kids with the hope of having the relationship with the kid that they can never have with their own parent or whatever it is. It gets really thorny really quickly.
For all of us.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. Like this is normal. This is like human shit and it's okay. Exactly. Yeah, but it's good to kind of have an awareness of what's going on in your own interior as you get into it.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about here, Joe, is coming back to what you said at the very beginning. There are these three places where stuff happens for people or where stuff can go sideways for people: in your mind, in your emotions, and the nervous system. I feel like we've talked a good bit about the mind and the emotions. When you said nervous system, I was kind of curious about that one. In part because you don't really present that way. And in terms, you come across very, very warm and very settled. And that was one of the things I loved about your videos, is that you're just like a very natural speaker and you've got this very calming presence. But I don't know if most people would like look at your headshot and read you as nervous system guy. So I was just wanted to ask you as that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the nervous system's tricky. What I notice is a lot of people doing nervous system work are trying to control their emotions through their nervous system. So,
for sure.
So it becomes an avoidance process, right? So is a way to not feel angry, where I would be like, feel angry, just do it with a great nervous system, so there's a little bit, so I take it a little bit differently than most people who are doing nervous system work. I'm not looking for an escape with it.
We're not trying to regulate you out of a feeling. Yeah.
I'm looking for it to build my capacity to feel more, actually, I think is a better way to say how the nervous system. So the way I look at nervous system generally is it's best measured. Like, so if you're measuring the mind, it's best measured by how wide your identity is and how much you believe your thoughts. The less you believe your thoughts, the wider the identity, the freer the mind. The heart is the capacity to embrace all emotions, to have emotional fluidity, to be able to love to feel your emotions and for the emotions to move quickly without getting stuck. Nervous system is your capacity to feel pleasure in the simple things. And so the breath in, the life general. So life is just by its nature pleasurable. It's quite like, it's just like, God, just feel your hands right now. It's like an amazing experience. But you can't do that if your nervous system is out of whack. If you're always in fight or flight, if you're always running, if you always think there's the next thing to do. So, so the nervous system for me is best measured just by your capacity to feel pleasure in the little things of life. That's how I think about the nervous system in my work. There's a lot of things to think about the nervous system, but
Yeah, but no, I love that you're focusing on pleasure and enjoyment for a whole bunch of different reasons. One of which is that most people approach habit formation or skill development essentially backwards. They're trying to teach themselves to like embrace the stick and run away from the carrot. If you think about most of the resolutions people set, they're just trying to take away all of these good things that they like and try to
right,
make themselves do all these things they don't want to do. And then they wake up on
right,
February 3rd, they're like, that didn't work. And then they
work.
go, why did this happen
That's
this
it.
way? It's like, well, because
That's right.
that your brain's not built that way. You got to
Right.
enjoy something. So love the emphasis on it. Um, Also, man, once you're in the world of pleasure, you're in the world of shame. And that's just a lot of content for people there, as I'm sure you're very familiar with. And so I'm
That's
wondering
great.
how you work with some of that.
You mean how do I work with shame, or how do I work with when people encounter shame?
In my experience, trying to get people to, or not even trying to get them, that's not quite the right language, but you, I think, follow what I mean here. When people start to open up around experiencing enjoyment, the
Yeah.
first block to that is often can't do that, and typically associated with some kind of a shame experience or a feeling of "Ugh," inside of the
Right.
body.
Yeah.
And that first wall can be really, really high and really thick. And I'm wondering how you help people encounter it.
Yeah. So typically, what I notice is that this is combined with emotional fluidity. So typically, people's first emotion that they're going to really allow to themselves to feel and move through is going to be anger or sadness, and then fear, and then excitement, and then joy, pleasure. Like, and the thing is the same. There's no reason to be angry. And I shouldn't be angry right now. There's no reason to be joyful. I shouldn't be joyful right now. And you can see this is like you walk into a coffee shop and there's a person there and they're crying. Like, what does your nervous system do? What does your body do? Right. And then now they're angry. Okay. What does your body do? Now they're scared. Like, what does your body do? Now they're just laughing hysterically by themselves in the corner. What does your body do? Right? We actually are more scared of feeling pleasure than we are of feeling negative stuff. And I see this all the time. We'll do an anger release and people will go for like 40 minutes and we'll do a pleasure experience. And, like 5 minutes in, I'm like, hey, it's been 5 minutes. You're done with pleasure. You're like, that's it. We're finished. What's happening here?
Mm-hmm.
You just did anger for 40 minutes. You can't do pleasure for 7. What's happening? And so
Yeah.
there's an amazing, so that, and so you do take it slow, because the more that we feel safe, the more what I call the cuttlefish come up, right? So if you have ever been in a boat at night and you shine a light in the water, like the cuttlefish come to the light,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then this particular metaphor, the cuttlefish are all the things that you haven't loved. And so if you start feeling safe and you start feeling love, all the stuff that you haven't loved comes to the surface to be loved. They're like, ah, cool, love time, let's go get it. And you're like, oh, wait, I didn't want fear. But fear's like, I wanted love. So come on now. And so there's that thing that happens when you actually sit in that pleasure and you sit in love, more of the stuff is going to naturally come to the surface. So that's part of it. As far as the shame goes, shame is built to stagnate us. That's like, so you're a little kid, you're sitting with your aunts and you fart on the couch and they shame you. It's built to have you stop farting. Like, don't, if you're sitting on a kid and you fart on the couch and your aunties giggle and say, this is fun, so then it doesn't stop you, right? So shame's designed to stop, and particularly stop emotions. And so to me, shame is an emotion that is basically an eddy of other emotional currents. And so typically what needs to happen if somebody's in shame is to dismantle the self-talk of shame and then feel the emotion that's actually underneath the shame, that wasn't allowed to be felt, that was repressed by the shame. And so typically I'll do that so that, and one of the easiest ways to look at it is okay, so you say you're bad for doing this. Would you say anybody else is bad for doing this?
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
and 90% of the time people will be like, no, I wouldn't call them bad for doing it. And then if they can, then you can always pick one person. Would you say that to your child? No, I wouldn't, or whatever it is. So typically there's a way for them to see through it.
Hey there. Thanks for watching, and sorry for the brief interruption. But it turns out that over 60% of the people watching this right now are not subscribed to the channel. So if you could just take a moment to hit the subscribe button, it would really help me out. I'd appreciate it a lot. All right, back to the show. I was just thinking for a second there about what you were saying a minute ago about what are the emotions that we're actually comfortable with? Are we actually more comfortable with, I don't know, fear or anger than we are with feeling enjoyment experience?
We never think it, right? We're like, of course I want to feel happy and joy, but
it's really interesting. It's I think that and I was just reflecting on it on more of a personal level, I guess, where I think that these days I'm definitely less comfortable, and this has always been a issue for me. Is not maybe quite the right way to put it, but you take my meaning. We're more aversive around fear and anger in particular. I tend to be kind of counterphobic. I'll convince people why they shouldn't be so worried about that thing that, maybe they should be worried about. That's kind of my temperament. Right. And enjoyment experiences for myself are one thing, but being kind of witnessed in an enjoyment experience, that's the thorny territory. You know what I mean? I'm happy to hang out there by myself, but like, whoa, right. When it becomes more of a group experience, I just, you think of, I don't know, people going crazy at a party or whatever, like those are the environments where I tend to like withdraw a little bit. And so it's funny how that like situational specificity can really make a difference for people, or maybe it's the relational aspect. I don't know.
Yeah. Same with, that was the way I was with sadness. I couldn't get sad at all, but then I could get sad by myself, could not get sad in front of people.
Yeah.
And I traced mine back to a trauma that happened where I was made fun of for crying regularly by my parents. Right. So, but it is interesting how some emotions work better in groups. And what I have noticed is that when there's the intention to move an emotion with everybody simultaneously, it's far easier for people to access generally.
Meaning
if we were like, okay, we are all going to enjoy ourselves here, and it's very like a known thing, it might be easier than if it's like at a party.
And there's a sense of, I don't know, shared objective permission is maybe the right word. Like you're kind of allowed to do this. You're even encouraged to do it inside of the space. Yeah.
It's a fascinating where we feel shame. And the funny thing is it doesn't really matter like which you pick. Meaning let's say there's three ways to react to fear. There's I'm going to fight, I'm going to leave myself and try to fix you. So I'll call that flight, and then freeze, right? We'll just say that those are the three. It doesn't matter which one you do, you're going to have shame around it. Like very few people don't have shame around whichever one that they do most often. It's an amazing thing how much shame comes alongside of emotions because it's stagnating. It's trying to stagnate that emotion. Instead of, oh, I'm scared. Yes. Awesome. This is fantastic. And it's an amazing thing because each of the emotions have gifts, and they all come with this warning sign. So anger, the warning sign is, if you get angry, you'll destroy what you love. But interestingly, we only get angry about stuff we deeply care about. So, which is fascinating. But then you start learning, when you start embracing the anger, you start learning, oh no, that tells me exactly where I need my boundaries. That tells me exactly where I don't have clarity, where I can have clarity and where I can hold boundaries with people. And so each of these emotions, fear is like almost often is telling you when you're stretching your identity, or when there's a place you're not taking care of yourself, like in the form of anxiety. It almost always tells you like there's an undone thing here that you need to do, want to do, that you're not doing, and it's creating like a tremendous amount of anxiety for you. So there's all these little gifts in the emotions when you stop saying no, don't feel it, and you say like what's the wisdom here?
Yeah. And I mean, one of the most common questions we get from people whether it's like YouTube comments or emails that get sent into the show, is how do I figure out what I want? How can I like, you talk about wants and needs. Wants and needs are like a total pet thing for me.
Right.
Because I
Me
just
too.
think that so much of life is about figuring out
Yeah.
which direction you want to row in. And
Yes.
frankly, change is fucking hard. So pick a direction that you actually care about, as opposed to just kind of like trying to absorb, other people's directions or get caught up in things that don't really matter that much to you.
Yeah.
And I think that what you're saying here about the value of emotion as a signal is so relevant for people, because when you start going down the line, they ask, okay, how do I figure out what I want? And you just start asking some questions. A lot of the time, what you find is that there's some kind of emotional experience that's being avoided, or there's like a tightness around it. Um, and a lot of the time, if you're a person who's listening who feels like cut off from that sense of what do I want? What do I need? Like, okay, what's the emotion that we're avoiding here? And it could just be a really helpful compass for people.
Yeah. I think that the other thing that's underlying the want piece for a lot of folks is it's usually if somebody can't identify their wants, it's usually indicative of two things. The first thing is that they had a parent-child relationship where the energy was backwards. It should have been the parent taking care of the child, and it's usually the child is taking it. And so they've learned to subjugate their wants for their parents. And so I'm not going to feel my wants. And it's interesting. Wanting is an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you want? Who cares? Just feel your wanting. Just actually allow yourself to feel the emotion of wanting, because you had to stifle that
I
to
think
take
that's a
care of your parents.
really good distinction here, Joe. Like, is it that you can't figure out what you want, or is it that you can't experience the sense of wanting as like a
Yeah,
sensation? Yeah,
as a
totally.
sensation. So
Yeah.
just take away anything you want. Just like throw that away and just feel what it is to want. And what you find out typically is that if you allow yourself to want without an object of wanting, it's a very close cousin to love, which is a hard thing for people to feel. And the second thing that typically happens, besides that parental loop being backwards, is that they're looking for their want in the future.
Mm-hmm.
They're not looking for their want in the moment.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you just follow your want right now, and then right now, and then right now, and then right now. And all of a sudden, the want that you have for your future becomes super apparent.
My dad is a very serious practicing Buddhist, has been for 50 years or something at this point. I would describe myself as a secular Buddhist. I'm not so, not so sure about the metaphysical aspects of it, but I
Yeah.
think that the Buddha was a smart guy, and the philosophy of it, I definitely connect with.
Yeah.
And this question of like, how do we get more into moment to moment participation with life is like a huge and fundamental question inside of that tradition. And there's, a lot of ink that's been spilled on it. But I'm wondering, when you're just practically working with people, what helps them get that sense of immediacy?
I mean, how do you get out of it is the question I
Hey, okay,
typically
love that. Yeah, yeah, because
like,
people
how do
find a
you get out?
way.
Like, show me how you get out of this moment.
Yeah.
Like, so that's one thing that I will do. The other side is just typically, I'll often just ask, how about right now? Like when we're
Mm,
talking about any issue, I'll bring it to this, like because typically if somebody's having an issue and that's like week long, then there's also a version of it that is right now. And there's also a version of it that's like decade long. And so typically I bring it into the moment because that's the only place you can experiment with it, right? You can't do an experiment. So a lot of the way that I do the work that we do in the courses and everything, it isn't me teaching and talking like this. It's here's a set of experiments, run them and see what you learn about yourself. Like learn who you are, and here's some experiments to do it. And all those experiments have to happen in the moment. They can't happen, over time. And though there's an accumulative effect. So for instance, one experiment to run might be for somebody here who's like avoiding enjoyment. 5 times a day, ask yourself, how do I enjoy myself more right now? That doesn't mean change anything. You don't get to change anything, right? You don't get to all of a sudden start playing a video game or take a deep breath. It's just like in this moment, how do you enjoy this moment 10% more, 5% more? How do you do that? Run that experiment for a week and your life will change. You'll understand something about yourself that is fundamentally different. But you can't say, enjoy this week 10% more, because the only place to enjoy this week 10% more is right now. Like that's it's the only place you can do it, you know? So
That's so funny, not to cut you off, but I think that so many people, when being asked that question, like, oh, how do you enjoy this week 10% more, are going to move into like planning for the future, to your point.
exactly.
It's going to be like, oh, well, I'll schedule this fun thing for tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's not about how do I actually
Exactly.
increase my engagement with the experience. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So all of the experiments that we designed are designed for this moment. And so that's another thing that happens. The other piece is that I think, there's two aspects to it. One aspect is I am going to practice living in this moment, which is a great thing. The other piece to it is if I get to know myself, if I see through my identity, all that's left is the moment. And so the other thing is just self-awareness leads to more moment-to-moment experience, more being what people call present. Oftentimes when people are being deeply present by practice, like I am going to very slowly pick up this glass and drink my tea and feel everything about it. Oftentimes they're not present at all. They're just moving really slowly and trying to do it right. Doing it right is not present. Like there's nothing present about trying to do this right. And now if they're doing it and they're enjoying the hell out of it, well, then they're in the moment, and then we're back to pleasure.
Yeah, with the trying to do this thing right, just like how we were talking about the self-criticism aspect, that can be one of the things that people who are high achievement types can kind of like attach to. Another version of that is perfectionism. And, perfectionism as a defense against criticism, negative self-talk tends to fuel a lot of perfectionistic instincts for people. One of the things I like about your work is that you really focus on the doing the work aspect of it. And doing is kind of a natural antidote to perfectionism in some ways, because you can't do something perfect. It's always going to have a mistake attached to it.
Yeah.
How do you help people with that kind of transition from being in the lab to actually putting something out into the world, or trying things on, or embracing the experiment that you're talking about?
Yeah. So on a head approach, what I typically do is I basically ask them to define perfect, and they can't ever define perfect. So perfection is not an actual thing. It is the avoidance of getting criticized or the avoidance of pain or something like that. But they like defining like what's the perfect logo? Like tell me what the perfect logo is. Tell me like so what you're actually doing is just trying not to get in trouble. So that's typically, and so then there's the emotional. The other part about perfectionism is that intellectually it's pretty easy and quick to understand that you're going to get to whatever you think perfect is a lot quicker through iteration, through messing up a lot of times. And so creating that safety. So a perfect example of this is I had a guy who cut my hair. He still cuts my hair. I don't think he cuts anybody else's hair anymore, but he's an artist, and he was like, he was not selling his work, and he was getting rejected. And I was like, okay, hey man, I'll give you, I can't remember what it was, like $1,000 or something. I'll give you $1,000 if you can get 50 rejections in the next 30 days or 3 months or whatever it was. And now he's a working artist because the switch in his mind went from perfect is not getting a yes, it's getting no's. I can earn money by getting no's. And then he couldn't get enough no's. So I never paid him $1,000, but he's a working artist. And so it's like that flip of the switch is neurologically speaking about the habenula in the brain. But the cool piece is like once somebody sees that, then the mind will let go of perfectionism. But it won't let go of perfectionism until you can say, I can't wait to get in trouble. I can't wait to be criticized. When that happens, then perfectionism just dies immediately. But typically that's what people want. And because they're like trying to get it right, be perfect, they're trying not to get in trouble, their nervous system's all tweaked. So they're not actually taking pleasure in the experience of doing the art or doing the business or doing anything.
A classic piece of writing advice that I'm just thinking of right now is prove to me that you're a bad writer, which is often kind of difficult for people to do in a funny kind of way.
Yeah. Or fuck it all up.
Yeah,
I want you to write the very worst start to a novel ever.
Write me the worst first page and then keep going. see what happens. A lot of time you get some really interesting stuff from it. I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got about writing came from a high school English teacher who was talking about their own experience in a poetry class. And they'd written this poem and they submitted it to their teacher at the time. And they got it back from the teacher, and the whole poem was crossed out except for one sentence, which had been circled. And they were looking at this paper like, what the hell, And then so they go up to the teacher after class. They're like, what do you mean? And they were like, no, the poem starts there. So start there and keep writing. And they did, and it was like their favorite poem they ever did. Because they got through the extraneous kind of process. Yeah. You got to get the reps in to find the one line that really mattered. And then they were able to really follow that in a meaningful way.
I met a guy who did Emperor of the Sun, wrote Emperor of the Sun, I believe, a long time ago. He said, my advice to writers is write your first million words and then throw them out, and then you're a writer. And nowadays, like, having created some successful businesses, I would say it's the same thing for business. Like, do your first 2 years of business, throw it out. Now you're a business person. Like, there's like if you're creating your own business, if you're an entrepreneur, there's something about just iterating, messing up, failing, trying, experimenting, learning quickly that is so critical.
There's some intellectual understanding that can help people with that, kind of like you were saying, either us giving these examples or, tell me what perfection looks like, can't do it, all of that. Man, at the same time, end of the day, there's a courage aspect to it. There's like an emotional aspect to it.
So you mean to release something into the world?
Yeah. Yeah, to do what you're talking about, to try for 2 years and be like, the first 2 years is testing, man. Like, wow, that can be heavy for people, particularly if they're not used to that kind of a mentality.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I think business or writing or any of that stuff is like one of the best ways to obliterate your ego, because it doesn't take courage unless you're taking it personally. If you care about your writing and what you're writing, it doesn't take courage. If you care what other people think of your writing, it takes courage. If you care if you're going to be successful, if you care about what people think of you, it takes courage.
My kind of like instinctive, I don't know, clap back, and you could maybe help me out with this, Joe.
Yeah.
Is essentially a version of like, well, I care about it though. And like, so there's this kind of like self motivation for it to be what I want it to be. It's not so much about the perception of it. Do you know what I mean?
So a kid plays with Legos.
Yeah.
Most kids play for Legos for more than a year.
Sure.
They probably play for 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
I loved Legos growing up, so this is a great example for me.
Did it require courage?
No, it's pure enjoyment.
Right. And your capacity to do Legos increased over that time. You built more and more complicated stuff. You put stuff out into the world.
Yeah, and you're totally right that there's an internalization of maybe it's like an internalization of a critical voice or something, or I'm not sure. You're totally right that something does change for people, and certainly just in the example I'm giving here, it clearly changed for me in terms of my own engagement with this kind of creative work, where I definitely have an internalization of the kind of, is this good enough question. It is not just pure play. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And somebody asked me recently, they're like, they were guessing about me, but they're like, you're probably post-economic, venture capitalist and whatever. And like, why are you doing this? And I used to have answers, that were like, we're building this business to help as many people scale, blah, blah. They didn't really last long. And my answer to him was, it's because I've got Legos. Like I'm just like a kid building Legos. Like, this is just like for my enjoyment of life. Like, this is why I do what I do. Like, I'm not trying to get anywhere. Recently, somebody a book publisher was asking me if I wanted to write a book, and I said my rule of thumb is I don't do anything for money that I wouldn't do for free. And I could put that probably today. I wouldn't do anything for notoriety that I wouldn't do for free. I wouldn't do anything for. Like, it needs to come from that intrinsic place.
Well, from personal experience, I can say that writing can be a real birthing process. So it could be a real mixed bag. There's a lot of beauty associated with it, but there's a lot of suffering associated with it as well. But I mean, look, like one of the things I talk about with people a lot is how experiences are made up of parts, and they got parts you enjoy and parts you don't enjoy. And I love going to the gym. I do not love every second that I'm at the gym. And that's kind of the helpful distinction sometimes, right? Where like the bigger picture motivation is so real in the way that you're talking about,
Yeah.
where there's kind of a curiosity about the self. Where can I take this practice? How good can I get at this thing? But it's entirely intrinsic.
Yes.
But does that mean that I love every rep 100% of the time? Absolutely not. No, but it's connected to something bigger. It's something that does have that Lego experience, to put your words to it.
Yeah, there's a couple things in that are interesting to me. So one aspect is like, how do you enjoy the rep you're not enjoying 10% more? How
Yeah,
do you
for
enjoy
sure.
anger 10% more? So there's that aspect of it, which is awesome. It's like such a great unfolding. But the other part is this idea that, friction, there's a problem with friction.
Mm,
So meaning, like, if I took all the friction out of your lungs, you'd be dead. If I took all the friction out of your cells, a cell, it would be dead. If I took friction out of a relationship, it would be dead. Like,
yeah.
there is no life without friction.
Yeah.
And
Hard is
so,
not bad.
right. Yeah. And so usually the way I see what you're saying is like, I don't enjoy every rep, but there's some friction. Of course, that's growth.
Yeah, totally.
And so, but the question is, how do you hold that friction ever more gently? It seems to be my question, that I'm never going to get rid of it. I'm not going to try to get rid of it, but can I hold it more gently? Can I understand it better? Can I welcome it more? And my noticing is that the more I do that, the more the identity gives, the more living in the moment happens naturally.
And I feel like that's one of the things that just creates discipline for people, where that's like part of that transition from I'm making myself do this thing every time to the thing just starts to happen because it's something,
Yes.
hello, that you enjoy doing. Like, to your point, it's the Legos. You want to go play with the Legos. And,
Yeah.
Sometimes we do have an activity that we like 80% of the time or even 65% of the time. And, you kind of got to make yourself do it the other 35% of the time. That's okay too. But you're really oriented toward that enjoyment aspect of it. Yeah.
My experience now is that was the case for me for a while. My experience now is there's really almost nothing that I have to get myself to do. There is a little bit like weights. If I'm lifting weights, there's a little bit of like that first, like, okay, go and do the thing.
Yeah.
But in most everything else, it's not been the case for me. It's really driven from wants. But then something happened some years ago where my experience was it became choiceless. Meaning, and I remember this woman identifying it in me almost before I could recognize it in myself. But it's it what I recognized was like there time when there's a calling or there's this is what needs to happen, and I might not want to do it. I might be like, or I might be like, no problem.
That's the part I'm speaking to. Totally. Yeah.
Right. And at some point I realized that was the short term, but it always was more painful not to do the thing.
100%.
Eventually the thing was always more painful. And then when that clicked at a deep level, it became choiceless.
Yeah.
I just
sure.
no, it's like, I just know how to run the maze kind of thing. And it's just weird. And it was the first time that I understood surrender in that way too, that the surrender wasn't I'm like relieving myself of my will. It was it was like the relief of choicelessness.
If you don't mind me asking, Joe, do you have a meditation practice?
I was just with a whole bunch of meditation people, and they were like talking about meditation practice. I'm like, what are you practicing for? I
mean, life, I think, is kind of the answer. Existence, egos, I don't know, but it's a good question. Yeah.
I've meditated a ton,
Yeah.
and I still meditate. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are a lot of ways to practice. It doesn't
Yeah.
always have to look like sitting on the cushion with your eyes closed, right? You can do it while you're doing the dishes or whatever else.
Exactly.
The reason I ask you, for starters, so much of what you're saying is totally consistent with what most people would think of as like the fruits of meditation, basically.
Yeah.
Where you're relaxing around the ego, you're lightening up around conditioning in different kinds of ways, And
Yeah.
there's this feeling that I sometimes call the like letting go of the rope sort of feeling. I don't know a better way to put it.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. Another is that kind of vertigo experience. Like you feel like you're on top of a high place and you're like beginning to fall forward, and people kind of pull themselves
Yeah.
back. And that's often the sense that people have when they first start getting into some of these experiences that are a little less egoic. There's like
Yeah.
a relaxing around it, and that can really
Oh, yeah.
be kind of frightening for people sometimes. There could be a
Oh,
real
it
like
should be.
aversion. Well, whoa, like what happens if
Oh,
I do
yeah.
the thing?
It should be scary as fuck.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
I mean,
I feel like if
remember
you're not
when-
afraid, you're not doing it right. Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there. I remember the moment. Like, I remember the moment when, like, where the abyss showed up and I went in instead of avoiding it for the first time in my life, and I freaked out and then like crawled my butt right out of it, and then like said, "What did I do? I should have let it go," and then tried to get back there for a couple of years. Like it was ridiculous. But yeah, there's the fear is part of what has to get processed. Like all that unfelt fear has to be processed if you're going to the ego, to some degree, you can say that a big part of the ego structure is unprocessed fear. So of course it's going to need to be processed, and that's usually when it comes up.
I think it's one of those things where you can talk about it to some extent, and you can share experiences around it is really what you could do. You could kind of tell stories around it, but giving advice around it is extremely difficult. I don't know if I'm like looking for the natural next, like, oh, helping people with that kind of an experience thing. But I don't know if it really works that way, to be perfectly honest. I think it's just an experience that you encounter.
The only thing I'll say is when they tell me about it, I'll be like, good.
Yeah.
That's the only difference. I'll just be excited for them. I'm like, oh, you're there? Fantastic. That's amazing. And then it's not like it's a one-time fits all thing. It's like every time a little part of you lets go, there's like some of that fear that shows up.
Yeah.
And so pretty soon you're like, oh, there's the fear. Yay. You get all excited for it because you know that the abyss is more freedom. So you're just like, let's go.
Totally. And your relationship with it just really kind of changes over time. I don't know if it makes it less scary in some ways. I'm just speaking personally, but I think you're right that like peeling back the onion, it never really stops peeling, or at least mine has currently not stopped peeling.
There's an interesting thing that I don't think I've ever tried to put words to before, but it's fascinating to me that people are scared of being scared.
Sure, yeah.
So
totally.
the fear of fear is basically, it'll make me less capable. If I allow my fear, I'll be less capable. It turns out to be just the opposite, right? It turns out that the more you can feel your fear, the more capable you become. Like just my experience, hands down, with hundreds, if not thousands of people by now. But it's really interesting to say, to like the first time that I was feeling fear, but I wasn't scared to feel it. And there's this weird thing where we kind of empathize with the fear. I don't know how to explain it, but the fear is arising. Yeah, great. But that doesn't mean that you have to be scared to feel it. It means that your body's moving fear, but it doesn't mean, and it's a very interesting when you can actually start welcoming that fear in a unique way. There's just like, oh, I can't wait to feel fear. Totally changes the experience of fear. And that's generally what I notice, is that most of the pain of what we call negative emotions is the resistance to them. It's not the emotion themselves.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that living in, I don't know, hand tied on the rope is just the root of like so many suffering experiences for people.
Yeah.
And what are we holding on to a lot of the time? It's often like protection from those painful experiences that we've been talking about. It just comes up as a theme for people over and over again.
Yeah.
As we've been doing this, Joe, is there anything that you've been thinking about in the background that you've wanted to, like, I don't know, just something that's been coming up for you?
Nothing.
No,
just
great.
Been engaged. It's been a great conversation.
I really appreciate that. I feel totally the same way. And is there anything that you would like to let people know about where to find your work, what you're doing these days, any of that?
Yeah. The best way to work if you're interested, if something I said clicked, then the best way to do it is to sign up for our newsletter at artofaccomplishment.com. If you need to know more before you sign up for your newsletter, then the podcast, we have 100 and something episodes of
Yeah. It's a
talking
good
about
podcast. I like the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah. And then we have a YouTube channel where you can see the rapid coaching. So those are 3 ways to get involved. And I hope you can put links below for them so they can just click.
Yeah, we'll have stuff in the show notes so people will be able to click the links down below. I really appreciate it, Joe. Thanks so much for taking the time today. This has been great.
What a pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
I really enjoyed today's conversation with Joe Hudson. We touched on a lot of different topics, but there were a couple of themes that we kept on coming back to. First, we talked a lot about emotional clarity and connection, understanding what we're feeling inside, relating to it more effectively, and connecting with it in a really honest and authentic way. One of the things that Joe said over and over again was it's when we repress or push away our emotions that we experience a lot of distress in life. You know, the feeling of fear as a defense against different kinds of painful experiences, or pushing away experiences of enjoyment even because we have a certain amount of shame wrapped up in them. We also talked a lot about developmental experiences and how those experiences can lead to different symptoms in adulthood. Again, one of the things that Joe brought up a number of times was the relationship between parents and children, and how when children are put into more of a caretaking role, you might know this as parentification, it's very common for those kids to grow up and become adults who are not in contact with their own wants and needs, with their own emotions, because they had to serve a kind of function for their parents. And then a big part of the job is reconnecting with that interior in an authentic and meaningful way. So how do we do that? Well, I would break what Joe talked about today into 3 categories that loosely track the 3 categories he gave at the beginning of the episode of the recording together, where he mentioned the mind as a way in, the nervous system as a way in, and then working with our emotions. First, we can do these thought exercises in order to expose the ways in which our mind is just lying to us about a lot of stuff. One example that Joe gave that stuck with me is, well, what does perfection look like? What does it mean to have a perfect logo? Now you could say, okay, something that's perfect is without fault, sure, but okay, go and describe the perfect thing. What does that really mean? And what we find if we investigate it is that attachment to perfection is the mind's way of defending against criticism. A kid doesn't need a set habit schedule to go and play with Legos. The kid loves playing with Legos. The kid wants to go and play with Legos. There hasn't been this story that's developed over time that playing with Legos needs to look a certain kind of way, and the final thing the kid creates needs to be good enough in order to be shown to other people. They just love the activity and they engage with it because it's personally meaningful to them. Another way in for people can be the emotional level. What does it mean to really accept an emotion? What are the things that we're pushing away? And what does what we're pushing away tell us about ourselves, about the experiences that we're avoiding, and the things that we are and aren't comfortable with? We talked a lot about self-criticism, and particularly the kind of negative self-talk that really stops people from getting more of what they want in life. One funny version of this is self-criticism connected to different kinds of personal development enterprises. It's really easy for people to get into personal development because they've just developed this really negative story about themselves, actually. And what we need to do as part of the work is not learn all these new skills and get all this new stuff in there. It's actually to help them drop that negative story. Joe mentioned how different people can struggle with different kinds of emotions, but one of the emotional experiences, if you can even really call it that people tend to struggle with the most is the experience of pleasure, enjoyment, finding what is meaningful and enjoyable, just 10% more enjoyable about this moment right now. And this is totally consistent with all of Rick's work related to taking in the good. So if you've listened to the show for a while, you're probably familiar with ideas like this. We talked about working with that kind of punitive voice in the mind, the self-critical voice that's trying to convince us that this self-criticism is how we stay on top of it, how we become more effective, accomplish more things out in the world. This is really what got us where we were. And Joe talked about different ways that we can start to work with that voice and reveal that it's trying to fulfill these purposes that are really about keeping us safe, not so much about helping us perform our best. And in fact, the way that it's treating us is actively counterproductive. This got us into a lot of material related to shame. I thought that was a very interesting part of the conversation, and I really appreciated Joe's perspective on it overall. One of the things he talked about that I really appreciated was how when these experiences are big emotionally, it's okay. There's an appreciation for the bigness of them. There's not an attempt to regulate ourselves out of how we feel. Strong feelings can come up for people when they're contacting emotions that are big or complicated. And again, there's a welcoming, there's a lightening up around total knowledge of who we are, being kind of convinced that we are a certain kind of way. And as part of that kind of way, maybe there are certain kinds of emotions that we push away, that we don't experience, that aren't really us. And then alongside that lightening up, that then allows us to open increasingly to the parts of our experiences that we've denied. We develop more don't know mind. We have more of this sense of, I'm not really sure. And that all of a sudden makes us more interested in possibility. What else could be true? Where else could I go? What else do I need to learn? And I think that that kind of open-minded curiosity, on the one hand, alongside deep felt enjoyment and a real focus on enjoying life more, is a great kind of two poles of Joe's work. And I really appreciated everything that he talked about here today. As he mentioned at the end, Joe has a number of courses and programs. I've included some links to them in the show notes for today's episode. If you are watching on YouTube and you scroll down to those show notes in the first place, you're going to be in the perfect position to click the subscribe button and maybe even leave a comment on the episode. That would really help us out. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you can also leave a comment, a rating, a positive review there. Really helps us out. And you can maybe even send this episode to somebody who you think would enjoy it. That would also mean a lot to us. Until next time, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.